I hope I'm audible properly. Yeah. Uh, this takes me back 19 years before from today, when we started our first Linux users group in our college. When we started Linux users groups in our college, that was also the time when Microsoft have started its Microsoft users groups in all the engineering colleges around Hyderabad, Chennai, Bangalore, everywhere else. So when this happened, obviously in college days, everybody have their own ideology to clinch to. All those classroom arguments, your canteen arguments, were very, very powerful. We used to have almost like your regular movie places when two student unions fight not with fist but with word power. So that's what we used to have. And when we had this, so the biggest question here is, when will the free software movement win? At the time, it was back in 2004, 2005, then we told, in 10 years' time, we are pretty sure this is all just we're creating on the fly. At the time when we were speaking these lines. In 10 years' time, we'll see Microsoft embracing open source. And that exactly happened. In 2014, when Satya Nadella was already the CEO here of Microsoft, they told Microsoft loves Linux. And it's 2024 today. I still have the question, did free software movement win? And that's what we will go into deeply here. The free software movement, generally what's there around the world, and the free software movement, what happened in India, is very different in the sense. The free software movement that happened in Europe, in US, had a contributed to user ratio at 33 to 100. As in, for every 33 programmers that are there in Europe or in general first world, you had around 100 users. Now, compare that with what happened in India. For every 0.001 programmer that is there from India, you had 100 users. So in India, it's more about consuming software than developing software. We are a third world country, and how we use software, the four freedoms of software, which obviously matter to every programmer who is there in the software ecosystem. But what really mattered here is what the free software in general, whether it is really powerful, whether it is very user-friendly or not, these were the more important aspects in general. What we have also seen during the time was free software's GUI was much more powerful than your Microsoft GUI. Though people generally see that Microsoft's Windows is much more user-friendly when you compare with Linux's command line argument. But very few people know that there are variants like Ubuntu, the variants like Debian, which are a very powerful GUI. And as free software movement, our work at the time was more about introducing this GUI to many people around us than convincing them to be part of the free software movement by becoming very good programmers. Of course, programming was also part of it, but as I told earlier, it is just 0.01 to 100 users. That was the contributed to user ratio. So, did this culture of the free software movement where people share the code together, did it just start with the free software movement in 1985? By the way, I'm just as old as the free software movement. That's exactly when the free software movement also started. We were 20 when it has taken off in India, and today we are still questioning, did the free software movement still have its victory? But free software movement did not really start in the 1983, 85, 83 when, as Abhijit has pointed out, the GNU project has started in the 1983. In 1985, you had the Free Software Foundation officially getting started and all. It was, say, in the 1960s when compatible time-sharing system, CTSS, was started in MIT. Before that, before CTSS, there were computers. There were no personal computers at the time, but there were computers in laboratories in the universities of US. So how did people use computers? in line. One person uses the computer and another person have to wait in line for their turn to use the computer. So this was the context of how computers were existing and how computers were used in US. Post the CTSS, this compatible time sharing systems, 3 or 4 programmers together used the same processor and did their computing jobs simultaneously together. The most important factor for us to observe here is when they were accessing this computer at a single stage together, they were not doing their own program on their own. If programmer 1 writes the line 1, programmer 2 writes the line 2, programmer 3 the line 3. What do we see here? It's a collaboration that is happening simultaneously in the programming world. Was it 1983 when Richard Stallman started? No, we're talking about 1960s. What tells to us about this? The free software movement, whatever it was, it is not that started in the 1980s, but it was the default existence of free software model of, or rather, the software model of production itself was like that. And Unix, as Abhijit has showed you the genesis of Unix, AT&T and Labs, when it started in the 1970s and late 1970s, though they had their own copyright on Unix, they still allowed people from universities to contribute to Unix. That happened in multiple universities of US, in which the most popular contributions used to come from the University of Berkeley. And they had their own version of BSD, which is your Berkeley software distribution. After that, the late 1980s and the late 1970s and the early 1980s is when you have seen AT&T Lab restricting the contributions and releasing Unix as a proprietary software. And who contributed to Unix after AT&T? It is all the programmers. And who started reaping benefits out of this? AT&T Labs. And that is when Richard Stallman have started a project called as GNU project. The GNU is not Unix project. So this project is everything that you have previously done with Unix, but it is not Unix in a way that this would never turn proprietary. So this was the claim that the Richard Stallman started the GNU project with, later established the Free Software Foundation in 1985. And the amount of lines of code, billions and billions of lines of code were written by programmers all across the globe. The great minds of programmers were all put into this one great ecosystem, that is the free software ecosystem. And from this great free software ecosystem, all that the software empire that is there around us, all this billions and billions of software empires that is there around us, who built this is this voluntary software programmers sitting in their bunkers, sitting on their couches, programming continuously, connecting to each other. So this was a brilliant thing that was happening. As Abhijit earlier pointed out, programmers romantically believed that, are we changing the world? Are we hacking the capitalism? Is a communism the most ideal state of society that many aspire for? Is it already there here before all these fights that the previous believers of communism have pointed out that should be done? So this was the world what we speak about in the 1990s. While the software programmers were busy developing all this, there was another set of people who were quite busy with their own models of business around this software ecosystem. It did not start with Microsoft starting their first version of software commodification. Well, it is not just Microsoft or Bill Gates, but before them itself, many people started believing that it is only a commodified version of software that can take software to people, that can take to all the corners of the world. Never believe them when they say they are actually their actual aspiration is to take software to all the corners of the world. The actual aspiration is to sell software to every corner of the world. That is exactly what they wanted to do, and they did it. Apple, though, before them, when they were already creating PC, they used to combine the PC software and your hardware together, and they combined it and they sold it out. Microsoft was one of those first operating systems which started selling only the commodified version of the software by combining with IBM or HPs of the world and installing it any other hardware, and they started selling, and thereby they also saw that success of commodified version of software. But the first question here that needs to come here is, had there been no commodified version of software, would the success of software as an ecosystem be possible? But the first thing that we need to keep in mind here is, all that was built on software was always built voluntarily in the free software ecosystem before the pre-proprietary age, rather in the pre-proprietary age or in the free software ecosystem age. It was always built by the free software guys as a part of their voluntary contribution. So that was always there. Taking it to the people, it was already happening. There were many hardware companies in your traditional capitalist model that was already happening, taking the ecosystem, rather taking the software built by the programmers into the world in a commodified version. Software commodification did not accelerate taking it to the people, but it only benefited very few software lords who made billions and billions of dollars out of the free labor that's contributed by voluntary people across the globe and best minds of the software world. So in our college days, one of the very big slur that we used to have for all those people who were supporting the open, the proprietary system was, the proprietary guys never work anything. They sell temple offerings. Just like in Prasadam you receive in temple, imagine one person sitting there in line, one after another, receiving all the prasadam and going outside to sell that prasadam. Who made that prasadam? All the bhakts there have together made that the prasadam, and who sells it? One person in the name of the prasadam. That's exactly what all these software giants have done to make this billions of dollars. And that was the kind of arguments that we used to have in our college days. And it reminds me after Arjit's point of how the free software users groups in colleges was there. So traditionally, we should also remember that the zero cost reproduction of software also helped how it it's different in any other commodity that is there. You make this particular chair with 100 rupees, you want 100 copies of that chair, you need to spend 10,000 rupees. You make a software copy for 100 rupees, you want 100 copies of that software, you just need to spend that same 100 rupees. It is just Control C and Control V, and that goes on and on. This is the major way how these software giants were able to produce more. So the traditional version of the free software, that is the freedom to use the software, freedom to run the software, to modify the software and redistribute the software, these four freedoms which the programmers have passionately embraced, that spirit continued on, and it continued until 2003. And what happened in 2001-2003 is the person, Mr. Eben Moglen, Professor Eben Moglen, who was working with the Columbia Law University, who was also part of Free Software Foundation as its legal advocate, have fought many cases against these corporate laws in the 1990s in the US. And what were these cases about? These cases were around licensing of software. And what were the licensing that Abhijit have already mentioned, the GNU General Public Licensing. The GNU General Public Licensing, just to reiterate what it does, any software that is produced in GPL, somebody uses that, somebody modifies it, you are obligated to re-release that software that you have modified also in GPL again. And that's a chain, it has to go on and on. If you do not release your software in GPL again, you are liable for a court case. So that's exactly what Eben Moglen was more involved in. So what were these big corporate lords doing? Your Solaris, your popular open source software, the open source operating system, which was run by your dear Sun Microsystems. So they had a huge part of software which is Linux, and they added some more parts of it and started commercializing. One case. There were many people who made Apache And how do you commodify Apache? Since Apache is a web server, there is no real model to stop commodifying Apache. So what they did was making this web server sit in a place until the time the market of software ecosystem was just a PC, selling more PCs, selling PC software. After Apache, what happened was the model in which the software ecosystem moved is from a PC model to a client server model. So in server, you have the Linux server and your Apache web server, and people started accessing everything in your client model, and the services of software were provided by the server to the clients, and you commodify the client environment. And that's how the model started emerging. And that is where another new model of licensing have come up, what you call as an FRO GPL, AGPL as what you call it. What FRO GPL says is, just the way GPL mandates anybody using GPL also to further comply with GPL, FRO GPL also mandates you to comply when you make a software on top of any server-based free software. You are further obligated to release all your softwares also in the same way how GPL works. So this is made. So many more cases started coming up for Evan Moglen and his friends in US. So when we saw all these things happening, that's when Evan Moglen in 2001, 2003, he was talking multiple times, and he further wrote his first, before he writing Anarchist Triumphant, he wrote this pamphlet called as the Communist Manifesto. Just the way Karl Marx have started his Communist Manifesto, as the specter is haunting Europe, Evan Moglen also creates the same points. A specter is haunting the monopoly corporates of America and Europe. And here, just the way Karl Marx writes about the bourgeois and the proletariat, he writes the owners and the creators. Now let us look at this particular contradiction between your owners and creators. We don't really look too deep into it. We have already discussed that. Who are the owners? Is there any difference between the creators and the owners here according to GPL? No. The GPL perfectly makes the creators of the software the owners of the software. But in commercial way, who have become the new owners or the new lords of all the software? The people who sell this software, the monopoly organizations. You Google, before Google, you have this other corporate companies which are working on this. So this way, the Communist Manifesto brought up a big conversation, or rather summed up the kind of contradiction and the struggles that were happening. These were not on-street struggles. These were the struggles that were happening on your chat boxes, in the court of law. But these are not these big struggles that you see on the street or big mass insurrections. This is not that kind of a struggle. These were practically happening there. So the only way how the software programmers had to assert their part of the struggle was making more software and make more GPL. Other than that, they had no big creativity in making, in a way, how you can really hit back at all these monopoly software companies, which I want you to note as one of the first big weaknesses of the free software movement, where they did not hit back at these monopoly corporate lords, other than a way of sticking to their idealist notions of making software, but not any other way of hitting back at it. As many people have expected, as Abhijit also pointed out earlier, a popular rebellion might have happened. That never happened. We were all just, as youngsters, we were just waiting for it to happen. When will it happen? When will it happen? That never happened. But more software on free software ecosystem started developing on and on. So post 2003, or even going to the further into Communist Manifesto, or rather further deepening into this owner and creator. The contradiction between owners and creator is an age-old contradiction. The people who have created something, the people who have owned it and have further sold it. So the point of further deep introspection of really, does anybody own anything, is the first question that we all also need to ask ourselves. Many of us know steam engine was one of those qualitative changes of bringing up industrial revolution in Europe. And when this happened, many of us attribute the success of this industrial revolution, or rather to one particular invention, is what you call the steam engine. And the obvious question, who made the steam engine? James Watt, right? So that's the answer that everybody gives. So did James Watt really make the steam engine? Did he construct the steam engine apparatus, everything from the scratch? Harnessing steam was already an existing practice in science. James Watt's only point was adding a knob to it, and he started getting a patent on it. And once he got this patent on it, he got so rich that he was able to influence the government, and further his patent, which was the software patent in Europe, was only there for 14 years. The software patent in India, in America, software patent literally means you can have the monopoly on that invention, and you can exploit that invention only for a particular period of time. And why was this patent also as a system introduced? To bring in more inventors to come out, tell their patents of how, or rather tell their methods of how they created that particular apparatus. So that was the motivation. And as you know, anything that was granted a patent, the first thing that happens is the apparatus of that gets published, and that gets reviewed, and a patent is granted. So the first thing that we need to note here is, when something is granted a patent, what really happens is you get an access to how that apparatus was made. So patent also in those days was about giving an opportunity for more people to add to it, but at the same time the inventor can commercially exploit that invention for a limited period of time. This was more or less a compromise, but not the most progressive thing that you can do during the time, but it was more or less a compromise that happened. And when this happened, James Watt, who was so rich for the 14 years where he owned the patent, could influence the parliament to extend his patent for many, many more years. And that patent continued until this grand old man died. And that one good day when he died is when that patent expired. And that day when the patent expired is when this more contributions to this apparatus was possible legally. Within few years, you can see industrial revolution happening together. So it was not the James Watts or the inventors' invention that made the industrial revolution. It was the death of the monopoly on that particular invention that made industrial revolution possible. So we need to understand here that innovation and invention per se is always an opportunism of that particular person who is always about himself, but not the many people around, about the society around. But free software programmers romantically believed in an idea that failed, or rather, let's see what happens. But do not compare them with these ideas of monopolists. In the name of some patents, they could control everything. And also, just for a quick difference between the patent and the copyright. Copyright, just the way you have a copy left for a copyright, why don't you have a patent left for a patent? Because a patent is given by the government. The state approves this patent for this inventor. Copyright is not approved by a particular government to the inventor or to the person who writes it. It is taken by themselves. So it is in your hands on how these terms and conditions needs to be put up there. If you are a writer, if you are a poet, or if you are a software programmer, it is your prerogative on how you want to see how your work should be further replicated, further used. But with a patent, it perfectly comes with a complete monopoly on the idea. So that is where people started believing copyright is okay, but still it's a method of monopoly. Patent is definitely not okay. In India, that's one of those days in 2010, 2011 time when the free software movement had to fight against this patent regime and ensure that the software patents in India were not legal. And imagine, is software patentable? What is software fundamentally built on? Zeros and ones, right? What is zeros and ones? Mathematics. Who made these zeros and ones? It is our cultural, I wouldn't say heritage, but it's our cultural property. We have been inheriting this cultural property from ancient times. This number counting system, these algorithms, most recent times. All these are a common cultural property of everybody. Property is again wrong way to use it, but intellectual property is a guise that is used for stealing our cultural inheritance. That's exactly what Eben Moglen terms it as. And post this period, what happened is once intellectual property, or rather, let's again come back to software patents in general. Software and patents cannot go together because patents is complete idea getting monopolized, where copyright is only about that instance of an idea getting monopolized, which is still bad. Even that does not accord with the points of free software freedoms and all. It does not really agree to it. But it gives you a chance of copyleft, since terms and conditions are the programmer's prerogative, and it goes on from there. So from there, the Communist Manifesto, Eben Moglen brings out several points apart from these 4 freedoms that are given by the free software, majorly by Richard Matthew Stallman. So Eben Moglen does not just want to talk about free software per se. He says, along with free software, we also require an age of free information and an age of free knowledge. Knowledge should be shared freely, information should be shared freely, and for this to happen, he believed that the electromagnetic spectrum, or your spectrum, your 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, whatever we're part of today, everything should be free and open for all people to use to transmit. The person who runs, or rather who has given away this property as an open cultural center around himself, was a person who used to run such kind of radio networks, ham radio networks that has been existing in Hyderabad since 1970s. So that's one of your earliest models of free information, models that were existing, though not very popular with working class or to the poorest of the poor, but generally a model of freeness was existing in the electromagnetic spectrum. But today, in this electromagnetic spectrum, the white space is as limited to 1 degrees. Out of the 180 degrees of spectrum that you have, it is just 1 degree of spectrum that is allowed in the white space, freely, commonly usable. All the rest of the things are sold. You know the 2G, you know what happened to 3G. You also heard about those big scams around 2G, the 2008, 2009. This is exactly what we the people have lost. We lost what was our common property to the corporate lords. Even one grand old man who was no more in the recent times was one of those participants of those big 2G scams at the time. It was his companies who were part of those 2G scams during that time. And whom did they steal from? We the people. So here, why are we talking about beyond free software into an availability of electromagnetic spectrum also being freely available? Because free software movement could not just be a software movement with only these 4 ethos. It needed to move beyond that. Few places it did, it survived. Few places people only have stuck to those 4 freedoms and nothing more. And we know what happened with all that. They still stuck with those 4 freedoms and nothing beyond that. So what started as a simple PC computers, that is nodes, further expanded as a client-server architecture. Post that client-server architecture is what you have this huge server farms, which is a SaaS model of businesses. Now tell me, when the software is free to run, free to modify, rather free to redistribute, free to copy is existing on the server, how does that affect the user who is on a cell phone, a small device in his or her cell phone, And how does that change the total narrative? It does not really impact this user. Earlier, when the user was using the direct software available there on the PC, the software code being available to the user makes sense because they can change to it and make it the way they want it to work. But when the software is now sitting on those huge servers, which all of us cannot afford together also, how can that software being in open or rather in free software model paradigm, how does it really impact the small user who just uses a device that fits on the palm while these servers own or rather are present in acreage of land, even on the seabed, acres and acres of seabed or acres of lands as server farms? How does that really impact? So that's where free software movement only restricting itself to these four freedoms, but thinking nothing beyond that has costed what could have been a better thing. Well, if you ask me, beyond that, what more could have been done? The existence of free software movement as a model of commons, the longer it exists, we can show people that such kind of a model was possible, which was once the order of the day before the proprietary software emerged. That was the order of the day, as we have seen the pre-proprietary age of Unix or the CTSS, or for that matter, any software that was developed before pre-proprietary age was always a free software model. That age existed, and that was during that time. And even there is no ounce of doubt that proprietary model of software development could not have even reached a very small inch forward had the proprietary software model existed as the only model of software development since the 1960s. It is purely the collaboration between the programmers that made the software empire possible and what we see today. And now, when few people have started looking at free software movement as not just about restricting themselves to the ideas of software, but also to the ideas of information, ideas of free and open access to the spectrum and all, there came up new ideas. These are only new attempts. These are not extraordinarily great ideas which have changed the total face of internet. But there are new ethos that have started to build. And these new ethos, as Abhijit have showed a few instances of diaspora, Mastodon, and these ideas have come up, which will, in a way, a federated model, number one, an encrypted model, a neutral model, and four, your accessibility. And Freedom Box was one such idea that combined all these four aspects. So we, at the time, or we still continue to ask Commons Collective, we established those kinds of freedom boxes in the rural areas and the tribal areas. And when we do that, what we do there and what happens there? When a freedom box is installed in a village, you are giving the last mile connectivity for the user in a neutral way, where all the websites get accessible, and it is federated, and it is accessible at a much lower cost than the already low data cost, since the costs are shared by all the people, and it is encrypted. Any communication that happens between the village, inside the village, is also complete encrypted communication. So what are we really achieving with this kind of a thing? Are we achieving that ultimate goal of socialism, communism with all these things? No. We are only building, quote unquote, a better capitalism, and also showing a commons model that is possible, how people can share what is already, what is there to share. Otherwise, the society that's getting constructed in a hyper-individualist manner, we all know what we do. You have a phone in front of us, just continuously put up your shorts, your Instagram and everything, which, by the way, were all those softwares made on the platforms of free softwares. These are all your big monopoly giants that you see own and run the softwares on the free software platforms. Very minor component of the software development happened in their own models and brought it forward from there. So now, whatever. With the Freedom Box, once we have established this kind of a ecosystem there, we could show that a commons model was possible. And again, looking at this thing. So even this, does this also answer, did free software win? No. Free software did not yet win. We also used to tell, when we talk about a node, or rather a computer getting installed with free software, we used to tell that this system is democratic. Why? Because this software, the Linux operating system and all the other softwares attached to it, were made by the people, for the people, and of the people. And that's how we started calling this. And when FreedomWorks was made, we thought, when the contradiction that was there at a PC have moved to the networks. When FreedomWorks gets installed in all the places, we tell each and every network is made by the people, for the people, and of the people. Is it right? Who owns that big fiber optic lines? Who owns that big fiber optic lines? It is owned by Jio. It is owned by these big monopolist institutions. Of course, you can really stop that communication that's happening around. You can encrypt it, but you can never achieve that complete hold of the people on the networks. All that you can do is establish a small commons model and show that a commons model is possible, and dream for a bigger possibility tomorrow. So low-cost Wi-Fi networks was the next stage what the free software movement in general in India has explored. Few parts it happened, few parts it did not happen. While these models were getting popular, on the other side, these big monopoly corporations have come up with many more ideas. It's about AWS. AWS started commoditizing on MySQL, which was a free software earlier. They started putting up MySQL in a particular big server farm and started giving MySQL as a service. They started giving database as a service. Your Python, your PHP, as all those programming languages shown earlier, everything was a product of free software ecosystem. Everything that is put together. So the control of code was possible with the control on cloud for all these monopoly corporations that continue and still continues. So from here, what kind of a world that we are currently in, and what kind of an age that we are in? We all know the most popular word, the age of AI. So what does free software mean in this age of artificial intelligence? Most of this artificial intelligence, when we say a free software that is, rather an AI that is based on free software, we don't talk just about the AI software per se, the models of AI, and also the data that is given to AI. All these weights put together forms the system. And when we tell something as a free software AI, it is not just the source code of the AI model that should be open, but also the data that goes to the AI that should be open. The algorithms that were built on top of which this model was built, even that should be open. Everything should be freely accessible, modifiable, runnable, and redistributable. That is what we need to look. Is that achievable? When we achieve all these things, how does the monopoly still finds its way? What is the biggest news that you have heard on AI other than the OpenAI thing? Look at the name, OpenAI, but what they really do, they're open to take all your data and run and give it back to you. The name is open, but what really happens is further monopolization of all your data, and more importantly, yourself. The open data thing, earlier people accessed systems, later they accessed internet where your data was taken, and once open AI models of, rather the proprietary models of AI have come up, your thoughts are also no more protected. Every thought is a chain of thoughts. So what do you search on ChatGPT? We all know what you search on ChatGPT. You first ask a question, it responds. You then ask another question to it, it gives more responses. You are in a conversation. What is the most easiest way to steal your thoughts? To change your thoughts? Conversation. And that's what exactly is happening to you. And this continues. The ownership of AI in the hands of monopoly, we need to really look at it at a level of, are we really even free? Earlier we were not free to code, later we were not free to use. Today we need to ask ourselves, are we free to think? So this is the stage that we are today. And how do we answer this is the question that is in front of the free software movement. So the question still persists. Did free software movement win? It is in our hands. Can it win is also a question. But the ethos to which passionately few programs have started always holds good. The money that was made out of it, out of the free labor, we should never forget it. As we move forward, what more can we do? You might contribute to it, but do not forget, it is always taken away by these big monopoly companies in one way or the other, until unless, as Abhijit has rightly pointed out, until unless we as the programmers are free, we are truly free. As long as capitalism exists, free software movements, ideals cannot be achieved. They would only remain as ideals. The reality is possible only in a post-capitalist society, whatever comes. I do not commit to that of what really comes forward. I let it to you, I let it to the future generations. But as long as capitalism exists, the free software programmers are not free, they're not truly free, and it is in our hands not just to make the free software movement active, but also a fight for a society beyond capitalism to sustain and take it forward. We need to engage with broader rights movements. We need to engage with broader social movements to showcase what is possible. In showcasing what is possible, we might also, voluntarily or involuntarily, inspire other models of new age movements also. It is important to continue it, and it is also important to remember that we are not truly free as long as capitalism exists. Thank you.